State Representative Aaron Michaelwitz is our guest this morning, chairman of the Ways and Means Committee. Let's go on the record. The State House has plenty of money coming in, but taxpayers would like to see plenty of it coming out. Can the chairman help make that happen? It's time to go on the record.
From WCVB Channel 5, the inside word from Washington to Beacon Hill. Today's newsmakers are going on the record.
Welcome to OTR. I'm Ed Harding, along with News Center 5's political reporter Janet Wu. It's great to have you with us this morning. Hope you're enjoying your Labor Day weekend, as brief as it may be. But we're pleased to have Aaron Michaelwitz with us this morning. He's a Democrat. He's representing the 3rd Suffolk District since 2009. Chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee, a resident of Boston's North End, also a graduate of Northeastern University. So was my father, by the way, so it's wonderful.
Good Huskies.
Thanks for being
Good
here.
Huskies.
Go Huskies.
Go
right,
Huskies.
Wonderful. Great to see you.
And happy Labor Day.
Happy Labor Day, yeah.
I know. Can you believe Labor Day is already here?
Right.
It's scary.
Right.
So let's dive right in. The federal government issued a damning indictment against the Baker administration this past week, accusing it of making false choices in running the MBTA and replacing it with rider safety and public confidence with capital improvements. Is the Federal Transit Authority right about this?
I think in a lot of respects they are. I mean, I've read the report. There's a lot to it. There's a lot to still go through to get, to kind of get to the bottom of what are the right pathways to be taking from the legislature's standpoint. But certainly the FTA is dead on. There was a lot of decisions made that weren't putting the safety, first and foremost. And I think, particularly starting in 2019, incident after incident, and moving some of the money over from the capital side into the operational side certainly shows even more so some of those challenges.
So you were aware of a lot of this going on well before you read this report. Is that fair to say?
I don't think it was shocking or surprising, but certainly disappointing. And certainly some of the things that we saw in there were not necessarily things that we were aware of, which is why we started having oversight hearings the minute that the FTA announced they were doing this. Chairman Strauss has been holding those, and I think we're going to be holding those through the fall, and to try to see what legislatively side we can be effective on.
Does the legislature own some of the mistakes, not insisting on course corrections, for example, years ago, or intervening more vigorously?
I think everyone in state government owns, some of this. I think you can't walk away from it from any point of state government. So obviously the legislature is involved in this. But I will say, every time the administration asked us for funding, we provided it. Basically virtually at the full amount that they asked for. We've put up $650 million since the FDA report has come out, and the governor actually most recently in this last supplemental budget request is asking for $200 million more. We're analyzing that right now. But we still have work to do. But from a funding, this isn't just a funding issue. This is obviously something more of a culture discussion, workforce discussion, and a lot of discussions fall at the feet of the administration.
You don't live very far from the State House, so I suspect you walk more than to probably use the MBTA. But when you get on, do you feel safe, or have you felt safe for the last couple of years?
I do ride the MBTA to get through my district. My district goes from one end of the Orange Line to about halfway down through. So I do ride the MBTA on a regular basis. Do I feel safe? Yeah, I feel safe when I've taken it. I don't think I've ever had an incident. I don't take it every day. To your point, I walk to work, which is a beauty of my district, being able to do that. But I certainly, can sympathize with any of those challenges that people feel. We need to make the T feel safe. If we don't make it feel safe, it's not going to be something that people want to take, and we need to make it reliable, not just safe, but reliable.
Congressman Stephen Lynch sat in that very chair a couple of weeks ago and said that the T should go under receivership. What do you think about that?
I don't know, but I think partnership is probably the better. Yeah, partnership. I think we need to find the right balance of making sure that there is oversight. I think we welcome the oversight from the federal government on this. This wasn't a problem that was created in just the last couple of years. This has been a problem that's been going decades back, and it's going to take a while to kind of get us out of it. And so any involvement that the federal government can do to be helpful, I think we would welcome that. And but receivership, I don't know if I'm there yet. I would keep an open mind, but I don't know personally if I'm there yet on a receivership.
The other big issue on Beacon Hill right now is taxes. Voters are getting antsy about getting back their money, and they want to know how they're going to get it. This week, Governor Baker submitted final year-end numbers to the state auditor on tax receipts, and it concluded, as he's estimated, that voters are due $2.9 billion as required by the 1986 law. The state auditor, of course, has the final word on it, but do you think he's wrong on this?
No, I mean it's the law. It was passed in 1986 by the voters. It's only been instituted one other time. It's only been triggered one other time, I think, in 1987.
But do you agree that 2.9 billion is most likely the correct figure?
It seems like that is the correct figure. We didn't know what the correct figure was at the end of July when we were trying to make our determinations on how to move forward with the economic development bill, which is one of the reasons why we were a little hesitant on moving that forward. But now that we do have that number, the auditor will certify that, and we will move forward with that understanding.
The House Speaker said at the time that he was surprised and he felt that he was sort of ambushed a little bit by the Baker administration. My words, not his, because they did not know about this law. They did not know this money was due. As Ways and Means Chairman, did you not have the responsibility of knowing that and informing the Speaker? It's
not that we didn't know necessarily about the law, because I mean the law has been out there. I've heard about this discussion of whether it hadn't been triggered in 35 years. So for it to get triggered for the first time in 35 years was a little bit of a surprise to some degree. I think it's more about the amount that we were a little more concerned about. The last time this was triggered was $27 million in 1987. Now, granted, that is different times, and obviously, 35 years ago, so obviously those numbers are going to be much more inflated than they were back then. But the fact is that we didn't. I don't know if we saw it to that degree, of the multi-billion dollars that was going to happen. And I think that really kind of changed our outlook on exactly how to move forward with a lot of spending, because we do have a lot of things we have to worry about going forward.
So to that very issue, what do you think is the most equitable way and the smartest way to return the taxpayer money? Do you do immediate rebates? Do you do tax deductions, or do you spend it on programs to benefit taxpayers like T and school safety? What do you think is the best way to play it?
On that exact direct money, I think at the end of the day,
the $3 billion,
on the $3 billion itself. I mean, it's the way the law is written. It is going to be it's supposed to be a tax credit. I think the administration is discussing exactly what that term could mean. Could it be in a direct check to someone? Is it something that someone would have to file, later in April or next April when they're filing their taxes? I think that's something that we're continuing to analyze. I think we do have a lot of need and a lot of investments that we need to make going forward, not just in the MBTA, because as we know, this FTA safety report didn't give a specific dollar amount, but there is obvious numbers that are going to come out of that over time, probably in the billions of dollars range. We also have an early education funding discussion that we were having up at the State House, that we're going to continue to have based off the commission report that came out in March, which is over somewhere over $1 billion as well. There are funding needs that or spending needs that we do have up there.
But are you saying that most of the $3 billion, if not all the $3 billion, should go back as a tax credit in some form, either a rebate or something that you have to file on your income tax?
Yeah, I mean that's the law.
Direct cash, as opposed to spending it on things that will benefit the community as a whole.
I think we're going to follow the letter of the law on this and move forward with it. It is again, it hadn't been triggered in 35 years. There is a formula related to the wage growth versus excess revenue is how you get to this triggering point of 62F, which is the chapter in the general laws. I think that we're at that point. We need to move forward with it as such.
So I'm sorry, I'm simplifying the question here. Do you believe that this could be an income tax that people would have to claim on their tax return, an income that people would have to claim on their tax returns next year?
I think that's how it was initially described and written, but I do think the administration is looking at other alternatives potentially.